Hi everyone, I hope you're having an amazing time at Pulumi's Cloud Engineering Summit. I know that I am. I want to take this time to personally thank the team at Pulumi for giving me this space to talk about my learnings, my experiences, and code. So let's jump straight into it. My talk is entitled Code to Cloud. I'm kind of just going to give an overview of how I got my code to be hosted on the cloud with very little cloud engineering experience and how you can do that too. So I'll start with a quick story of a time that I worked at a company that did releases at night. And there was a reason we did this. We did them like Friday night at 9 or like Saturday night between like 8, 9 starting. These could end at up to like midnight depending on how well things went, how smoothly things went. And the reason we did this is because we didn't have a great CI/CD pipeline in place. So it was all hands on deck to make sure that nothing broke before, during, or after the release. I found this extremely nerve-wracking. One, I wanted to like hang out on my weekend nights. I'm young, so I wanted to have fun. And then two, I just don't trust myself to find every single bug and to know what's broken because I'm human. So most of the time, majority of the time, I would come in on Monday and things would be on fire. So that was to be expected because, like I said, we're human, so we couldn't pick out and predict every single error. On the flip side, after I worked at that company, I worked at another startup, but they used GitHub Actions to automate their release workflow. I was actually very impressed. I had never encountered or used GitHub Actions before that, and I was like, oh my gosh, so cool. The release takes 5 to 10 minutes. We can do it during the day. And if anything goes wrong, you can easily revert it. I was very impressed. And I think both of those experiences were valuable for me because they allowed me to see how important it is to have some kind of strong DevOps or CloudOps structure in your project and to, at the very least, implement a CI/CD pipeline. And I made it a goal to have a CI/CD pipeline for my personal projects and my freelance projects, just to get better practice and to get in the habit of doing that. So this talk, as you can probably tell, is going to be for front-end developers, early career developers, open source maintainers or contributors who are like, maybe I should implement some kind of CI/CD pipeline, or anyone who doesn't do cloud engineering for their day-to-day work. I know this is a cloud engineering summit, so a lot of y'all are cloud engineers. I'd advise you to still stick around because I want feedback. I want to know how I could have done things better or more easily. I'm sure I made things hard for myself. I also think it'll be cool for you to see from this perspective of someone who is a little bit more front-end heavy. So before I dive into that, you have no clue who I am, right? So my name is Roselle. I am a junior developer advocate at GitHub, and I was trained as a full stack software engineer 3 years ago. I've moved around the stack, but I've mostly been heavy on the front end. And I'm also a program director at G Code House, which is a nonprofit organization aimed at training women of color and people of color to code. And as you can see, I'm very passionate about empowering and educating others, especially within the tech industry. I'm passionate about my own learning journey, and I am addicted to Twitter. So because I'm addicted to Twitter, I would definitely tell you to follow me on there. I'll follow back. I'll interact with you. My handle is BlackGirlBytes. That's my handle on Twitter, #GitHub dev.2. I will soon to be on TikTok and YouTube. So if you want some awkward black girl content about code, definitely look out for me there. So, like I said, because this talk is for people who don't have that much cloud engineering experience or DevOps experience, you've heard me throwing around the words or the term CI/CD pipeline. Maybe you're wondering, what does it mean and why does it matter? CI/CD stands for continuous integration, and the CD part of it can stand for continuous delivery or continuous deployment. I think it is all about, and it matters for like these 5 reasons. So essentially it allows you, or through CI/CD pipeline, you're creating automated tests, code, builds. You're encouraging your team to make small incremental changes and check them in frequently. Cause nobody likes that person who is checking in like a long PR, like 90 files change. Now you're affecting the whole team. Now they have to all rebase off of you and get sidetracked from their actual task. It's also automating the delivery of these applications to production, to staging, to dev, and whatever other environments you have. It's also just enabling teams to catch bugs more easily and more frequently because you have these automated processes in place, and therefore improving the code quality overall and improving the team morale, because now they have a reduced workload. They can focus on collaboration, having fun, and coding. So, of course, with these talks, someone tells you about a new tool or something you should be using, and you're like, yeah, this is cool, but now I have to learn something new, and I don't have time to learn something new. I feel that pain. That's why I built my application with the intention that I am going to use familiar tools to host my project on the cloud and to implement a CI/CD pipeline. So I'm going to kind of show you guys my application very quickly. I built a Git emoji search app with Next.js, Tailwind CSS, and Fuse.js. I've never used these technologies before, but they were very familiar to me because I'm like familiar with React and I'm familiar with CSS. Let me show you the app very quickly. So here's my app, hosted locally. I'm calling it Cutemoji. It's nothing crazy, very simple interface so far. I'm sure it'll grow. It shows the first couple of emojis, and this is calling GitHub's API, emoji API. And essentially I can do a search for whatever I'm looking for. So let's say I'm looking for yellow. It shows me like a yellow circle, yellow heart, yellow square. Let's say if I search the word girl, shows me a bunch of girls. If I misspell something, what can I misspell? Maybe moo, or start to spell something. We got mooncake, boo, book. So as you can see, this is the start of my application, and it is using fuzzy search. I kind of want to show you guys how I'm using fuzzy search, because I thought it was cool. So I was able to do fuzzy searching within my app using Fuse.js, which is an open source project. I thought this was a great lifesaver because I was considering writing my own algorithm for this, which would have been a lot of work, or using a different tool that I would eventually have to start paying for as my project grew. So I didn't really want to do all of that. I was able to implement this with like very little lines of code. So let's look at it over here. As you can see, I have an options object and I'm passing in a keys property. And in this keys property, I essentially am passing in all the, property names of that object that I passed in, or the data that I'm passing in. And I'm saying like, I want my user to search by emoji name. And the include scores line is essentially saying like return the results that are most relevant. So it scores it in some way, saying like, oh, this is like most relevant to least relevant. I don't want to see the least relevant. Hide those or don't show those first. Then I create a new Fuse objects instance, and I pass in the API data and this options object that I just created. And then I call a method called fuse.search, and depending on whatever query that the user typed into the input bar, it'll call that search method on it and return the results. It was so easy. Like, what is this? Like, just a few lines of code, and I was able to do fuzzy searching. Okay, back to cloud and CI/CD stuff. Like I said, my goal was to implement CI/CD pipeline and to get it hosted on the cloud. Very simple stuff. I just want to do this as a teaching tool for myself, and I expect my app to grow beyond what it is right now. This is to me very simple for me. So I wanted to have it be able to scale and to be maintainable. So I also said I'm not trying to learn anything new. I'm trying to focus on using familiar tools and languages and platforms. So I decided to go for GitHub Actions, because I've been on GitHub for like ever since I learned to code. So I'm very familiar with it. And GitHub Actions has open source automated workflows. I was thinking maybe I don't have to start from scratch. Plus, actions are very well documented. Also, I decided to go with Pulumi to deploy my code to the cloud. One of the benefits of Pulumi is I don't have to like learn how to use AWS or Google Cloud Provider or whatever you may have. I just have to write in my favorite coding language, or the coding language I'm most familiar with, which is JavaScript. So I started off by creating an S3 bucket, and here's like my little Pulumi JavaScript that I wrote to create a new S3 bucket. And I told it to point to the index HTML file and a 404 HTML file to say like this is the index of the index document of the website, and then this is the error page. And then I ran Pulumi up. That's kind of how you deploy your changes. I was like, wow, this is so easy. I'm having fun. The only little problem I had is that I realized, wow, this is a Next.js project and I don't have an index.html file. So when I did Pulumi up and I went to go check if it got loaded to the S3 bucket, I saw an error. And I realized the error was pretty easy to fix. I was able to generate both an index.html file and a 404.html file by running next build and next export. I added this as a script to my package.json. That way I'll just had to run npm run export, and as you can see, it created an out folder with all of these files in it. So it generated a website URL for me. I could have given it a more specific name, and I probably will, but this was my first attempt, so I just went with S3 website bucket. Let's check it out. So now we are on that URL. It says S3 website bucket, bunch of random numbers. And we're seeing the same thing that we saw that I had locally. You type in words, you're getting emojis. So everything's working, everything's good over here. So essentially, I got it on the cloud. It's on AWS. Check to that one goal that I had. Then my next goal was trying to lay the foundations for starting up like a CI/CD pipeline. I do want to warn y'all, this isn't like the whole thing. It's not the whole shebang. It's just like a very simple start. And I realized Pulumi has GitHub Actions, so I don't really have to write my own. I was very excited about that. So here's how I initially set everything up to be able to use Pulumi's GitHub Actions. First, I enabled my applications to talk with each other. So I wanted Pulumi's GitHub Action to be able to talk to GitHub, and that required some authentication. So Pulumi needed the GitHub Action needed to call my AWS access key, AWS region, and all that. And instead of saving that in my repo for other people to access, I used GitHub Secrets, and now it's encrypted. No one knows, but my applications can speak to each other. I also installed the GitHub Pulumi application. This was a little tool that they made to allow the GitHub Action to actually leave comments on my PRs or whatever event that I used for GitHub Actions. And then I just copied Pulumi's GitHub Action code, their YAML, and I modified it to work for me. So first, they had two GitHub Actions that I found. The first one allowed me to see the activity that happened in my Pulumi stack. So if I made any changes in that stack, it would print out hey, these are the 3 things changed, or a small error happened. This way I would gain a little visibility into why something happened rather than going into the Pulumi console. We can take a really quick look at what the action looked like. Essentially, this is the name of that action. We're saying we want this to happen on pull request. We're doing a couple things that you need to do for GitHub Actions, which is just checking out the code, and setting up Node, configuring my AWS credentials for it, and then I think right here uses Pulumi/actions at v3 is where we're using Pulumi's GitHub Action, and it does all the magic behind the scenes. So on each of my pull requests now, I get a little comment. I'm not actually doing this. This is automated, and the comment essentially shows what things changed. For this specific PR, nothing changed. There was 2 unchanged resources for my Pulumi stack, and I thought that was cool. Alright, so the other Pulumi action or GitHub action that I implemented showed me a live preview of my website, which is something I wanted. I don't really have tests on my application yet, but I wanted that every time I do a PR, I can get a quick live preview before I merge it into production. Because I've had many times in my life where something's working locally for me, it's working on my machine, I'm like, wow, everything's all good. And then I merge it to production or whatever the main branch is, and I realize it doesn't work at all, and I have no clue why. So decided live preview might be a really great and easy way for me to do some manual testing. Okay, so let's have a look at my repo. I am in the pull request, and I opened up a PR of me just changing the background gradient. If you could remember, I had pink, and then it went over to a little bit of a bluish color. So let us see. Basically, again, here we have the first automated automated comment from the GitHub action, and then we have the second one, which gives me a live preview of the site. So let's click on it and see what it looks like. Cool, there we have it. We got a blue to pink to green gradient, which is what this PR was all about. Let's have a look at the actual code for the GitHub action. I modified this a little bit just to fit my use case, but basically what they had worked for me. First, I checked out the code. I essentially did npm run export again because it was looking for an index.html file, and I needed to generate that for the action. And then I use this update live preview called Pulumify that Pulumi created. I pass it all my environment variables that it needs, and the magic happens. So I want to make this disclaimer that I'm not done yet with the project. I'm near done with the talk. There's lots of stuff to do in terms of like implementing a strong CI/CD pipeline, but I think this is definitely a good start for me to lay the foundations. And it really only took me about like an hour or two to do all this. So this is me saying, like, go ahead, try it out. Try out GitHub Actions. Try out Pulumi. I hope this was interesting and edifying for y'all. Thank you for listening to me speak. And definitely check out my repo. It's at github.com/blackgirlpites/get-emojis. Definitely download it, play around with it, suggest some things for me to make it cooler. Because I'm still thinking of like what I could do with it. Thank you.